Hey everyone, I just thought I would post this video. I don't really like having to do things like this, especially to people who have college degrees. But this involves Pastor Timothy Keller, who is a pretty popular pastor. He runs a couple of mega churches up in New York. Has an enormous following, and that's why I'm putting some of this stuff out here like this. I don't get into the whole so-and-so teaches something that's false, so therefore don't listen to him. He's a false teacher, he's a heretic. I don't get into that stuff. But I've heard Pastor Timothy Keller say some things the last few years that are not troubling, that are not just troubling. They're really bizarre and show his ignorance of the Torah, the law of Moses, and how it was implied and interpreted at the time that it was given, and how the Jewish people have interpreted it. Now, I was raised in a Protestant home, so I used to believe everything that this guy used to say. Not that I ever followed him, but we interpreted things the same way. It just has to do with the Protestant way of interpreting the Bible, which most of the time is not in context. I've heard him say some really bizarre things down throughout the years. I remember a few years ago, I'm in Messianic Judaism for the last 7 years, so our rabbi had posted an article on his blog quoting Timothy Keller as saying that Christians who obey the dietary laws and the Sabbath deny the power of Christ, which that right there is just erroneous. I can't even believe someone would even say something like that. Number one, most of the Torah doesn't apply to anyone who is not Jewish. Only the ethical things apply to everyone. And I find it funny that guys like this will go around and they'll tell people, they'll see somebody smoking or going into a porn shop or going to a strip bar or something, you're disobeying God's law. That's against God's law. But then nearly in another drop of a hat, they'll say, well, that doesn't really matter because God's law's been abolished. So they talk out of both sides of their mouth, and they're really inconsistent. And, Jewish people like Tim Keller are out there pounding the pavement trying to convert people. And when he goes around and says something like Jesus disobeyed the law, Jesus came to abolish the law, which that statement right there is completely erroneous, since he said in Matthew 5 that's not why he came. It hurts Jewish missions, as it's called. If you are Jewish, and I've been involved in a somewhat Jewish community for many years now, when you go and tell them that Jesus disobeyed the law, he ignored the law, they are not going to listen to you. You can prove to them that he fulfilled one messianic prophecy after another. But the second that you say that he abolished the law or he ignored the law, they will not listen to you anymore. Any Messiah who comes and teaches that one commandment from the Torah does not matter anymore is a false Messiah. That's just the way it is. That is not an opinion, it's a fact. And, even Deuteronomy 30, Moses talks about how the children of Israel, after he dies, are going to fall away, and they're not going to follow the law, and they're going to be scattered to all the four corners of the earth, and then at the end, they're going to return back to the Torah and follow it. So if these guys really think that Jesus is the Messiah, but yet teach that the law doesn't matter anymore, it doesn't matter to a Jew. They are never going to follow a Messiah like that. Now, the three main points that I wanted to share, which are very bizarre, is Timothy Keller wrote an article called The Old Testament Law and the Change of Inconsistency. And basically he says, atheists and agnostics will say Christians are inconsistent because they don't follow the law. And then he quotes some things. But then he says Jesus ignored the law throughout his ministry. he says that Jesus touched lepers. That was forbidden by the law. He says he touched dead bodies, which was forbidden by the law. And he said that Jesus declared all foods clean. He is absolutely wrong about every single one of those things. Touching a leper is not against the Torah. That's how Jesus healed them sometimes. He touched them. Most of the time, he just healed them with a word. But touching a leper is not a sin. You just become unclean and have to go through the purification process afterwards. That's all. And that's the problem with many Christian circles, as I found out, and I used to be part of this. This is what I grew up in. They equate being ritually impure with sin, and that's ridiculous. They are not the same thing. As a matter of fact, if you're not sitting in the temple after you're immersed, you go in the temple and worship, the second you step out of the temple, you're automatically impure again. So everyone, everywhere, outside of the temple is impure. He also claims that Jesus touched a dead body, so that made him impure. Not one single Israelite outside of the high priest is ever commanded not to touch a dead body. This is how they are buried. And this is actually a great honor in Judaism because it's the last thing in a person's life that you can do for them and not be repaid back for in this world, is burying the dead. And as far as Jesus declaring all foods clean, I know exactly where this is taken from. This is taken from Mark 7, verse 19, I believe it is. There's only 4 versions of the Bible that actually have this passage translated correctly. All Jesus said was purifying all foods. He talked about food going in the body and coming out again, pretty much into the toilet, into the latrine. Purifying all foods. This whole episode was not really about food. It was about washing your hands and whether not washing your hands made your food that you ate impure. And he said no. And this is actually something very revealing about him as a rabbi, because Jesus accuses the leaders in this passage of changing the Torah. Because the Torah states that only things that go in the body, or only things that come out of the body, are what defiles you. And that's actually really true, because the Torah says things like fluxes of semen and blood and gonorrhea, things that come out of the body defile you ritually, but things that go in the body cannot defile you. And then he turns it into a parable and talks about things that come out of the human heart, murder, lust, adultery, stuff like that. This is a really heavy rabbinic discourse going on here, and this is the problem when Christians separated themselves from Judaism. They lost a lot of the context for interpreting these scriptures within their context. Jesus was a rabbi, and he was highly, highly trained as a rabbi. He was not some country bumpkin. But this is the problem with the whole paradigm of the Protestant Christianity that Timothy Keller is a product of, is their readings of a lot of these stories in the New Testament are just erroneous. And it's really sad because they have a huge following. And people listen to this, and then they hear their pastors like him say this, and they repeat it and then pass it on to their children. And then it makes you look really ignorant in front of a Jewish community who's actually educated in their field and look at Christians teach this stuff, and they just flabbergasted. They roll their eyes. It's just like, how can somebody be so dumb? And as I've said before, touching a leper is not a sin. Now, many people might try to quote Leviticus 5:3 to me, saying, if you touch a human uncleanness and you're ignorant of their uncleanness, you're not guilty, but when you know of it, you become guilty. Now, they think that's just the same thing as sin. No, it's not. You're guilty of contracting human uncleanness, and all he would have had to do was go through the purification process, and he would have been clean again. No problem there. Touching dead bodies is forbidden for the high priest, no one else. Jesus is not the high priest. Now, some people might say, according to Hebrews, he's the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, but it's not the same thing. He's the high priest in heaven. Down here, he's not. And it actually specifically says that if he was on earth, he would not be a priest at all because he's not a Levite. And once again, Jesus never declared all foods clean. I know this might be hard for people to understand, but I'll say that there are 4 versions of the Bible that actually translate this passage correctly as saying purifying all foods, as in the stomach purifies all foods. The King James Version, the New King James Version, the Modern English Version, and the Tree of Life Version are the only 4 versions of the Bible that actually translate this passage correctly. Every single other version of the Bible really botches this. And I wonder if there's not some kind of conspiracy or something behind it to make Christians believe that he declared all foods clean, because I just don't see how a translator can fudge up the Greek language here so terribly. And as I've said, it's just really sad to see someone with such a big following believe such things. Someone who's actually been to university believe such things, because they're completely false. It's not even a matter of, agree to disagree. He's wrong. That's just the way it is. Now, I myself don't have a college degree. I went to Bible school for a couple of years and dropped out of it because there's just so much junk there. Especially coming from an evangelical university like I went to, Liberty. But I just look at this stuff. I'm involved in the Jewish community. I've spoken with some rabbis, studied with some rabbis, and I look at this stuff and I'm just like, Christianity has so many things wrong. Now, I'm not saying Christians have an illegitimate faith or, they believe stupid things or stupid doctrines. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm the only member of my family who's in the Messianic Jewish movement. But when I hear people say stuff like this, and it's just plain wrong, not a matter of opinion or agreeing to disagree, they're just wrong, it's really sad, because people hear that coming from a respected teacher, a teacher they respect, and they will pass it on to other people, and this is how all these false doctrines get passed around. And as I've said before, if you're working in a missions to the Jewish people, Jews for Jesus or anything like that, and you go up to an unbelieving Jewish person and tell them that Jesus freed them from the law, it does not matter what you say. You can prove to them Jesus fulfilled messianic prophecy after messianic prophecy. But the second you say that he abolished the law, or he did away with the law, or he did away with one single commandment, they are not going to listen to anything you have to say, because it specifically says in the Torah that if there is a prophet among you, even if everything he says ever comes true, but he tries to take you away from these commandments of mine, do not listen to him. The Torah is eternal. It says that in the Torah. They are to keep these commandments throughout all their generations. So if a man comes by at any point in their history and tells them not to obey the Torah anymore, they're a false prophet, just the way it is. Do I think that Jesus was a false prophet? No. But I also think he is not represented very well by many in the Christian community, including Timothy Keller, who I would urge to actually meet up with some Jewish thinkers, rabbis, and actually study and learn what these things really mean. Because it's very clear that he really doesn't know. And it's really sad, because he has so many people under him that he teaches. This kind of stuff just has to stop. And, for the most part, the Christian community has taken large steps to actually really educate themselves in what the scriptures really mean, because they've realized in the modern era that they made a huge mistake separating themselves from Judaism. So they're getting back into the Jewish roots of the faith and going to rabbis and Jewish thinkers to actually educate themselves. But I don't think this will ever happen with someone like Timothy Keller, because as I heard the evangelical scholar Scott McKnight say recently in the last couple of years, that, he believes that Timothy Keller does great work. And I do too. I think his heart's in the right place. I don't think he's just an ignoramus, an idiot or something like that. But I agree wholeheartedly with what Scott McKnight went on to say, is that Timothy Keller still embraces an opinion of Paul and Judaism that has been completely blown away. Timothy Keller believes that Jews were observing the law to gain favor with God and to earn their place in the age to come, heaven. And that's completely wrong. That's never been true, and it never will be true. And he still embraces these ideas. And I actually applaud Scott McKnight for saying something like that, because he's got to change his opinions. These opinions are erroneous, and they're just flat out wrong. It's not even an opinion. They are wrong. And he's one of the top guys that does this. I mean, John Piper does some stuff like this too. But when I sit back and, I read a lot of scholarship, stuff coming from universities and things. And I look at how a lot of these Christian authors and Christian pastors will teach some of this stuff. They'll quote something from the Leviticus, or, Jesus sinned because he touched a dead body. That's a proof text. It's a little taking something out of context. But then if you go back and read in context, it's talking about the high priest. And he is not the high priest on earth. People need to take their Bible more seriously, and people need to study their Bible more responsibly. Don't just quote a passage here and there, because context is important. And I'll even quote Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I'm a big fan of. He stated in an interview, his last interview actually, before he died, that people today, and this was actually in the 70s when he said this, people today do not study their Bible responsibly. They'll just take a little snippet here, a little snippet there, make a whole doctrine off of something. And this just leads to big misunderstandings. And when I see stuff like this coming from Timothy Keller, who is a pastor, who is a pastor of a mega church, Jesus touched lepers, Jesus touched dead bodies, Jesus declared all foods clean. Okay, yes, he did touch a leper. He did touch dead bodies. It wasn't forbidden by the Torah. It would have just made him unclean, and all he would have had to do was go through an immersion process afterwards, and he would have been clean again. Declaring all foods clean? It's ridiculous. The guy was a rabbi. And even if he wasn't, he was still Jewish. Still obeyed all that stuff. It's just ridiculous, and stuff like this has to stop. I'll even say this, he's making people like me look bad. Am I involved in Christianity no more? No. But I'm still a believer in Jesus, in the Messianic Jewish context. And when people like him say something like that, it reflects on all of us. And I mean, I've even had a few Jewish people who have quoted him before and asked, do you believe that? And I'll say no. And I said, in my opinion, he needs to go back to school and actually study stuff from people who know what they're talking about, because it's very clear he does not know what he's talking about. But I guess I've said what I'm going to say in this video, and hopefully the comments in this string aren't too horrendous. I'm sure I'm going to offend some people, but I guess that's what you're going to do when you call somebody out for not educating themselves the way that they should.